this was a question I asked. How are you going to before? How are you going to take?
If you
giving 100 grand.
I'm really sorry, but we've got a lot of questions to get through, and we will have to.
Shall I just give a one sentence answer? You need to reform compulsory purchase.
Yeah.
You need to reform of compulsory purchase, which means it's possible to buy at pre-use value rather than this thing called hope value, which means that you get all of this big increase. That's what the post-war Labour government did. It's why it was possible to build the new towns, and we need to return to that.
It's actually the reverse of that reform is part of the reason why we've stopped being able to build new towns, actually. It's the small change makes a big difference.
That's great. I'll take more questions now. Can I get the woman in the red cardigan there, please?
We're told that NHS is at a breaking point at the moment because there's too many of us that are too old. Well, we've been here 60 or 70 years. Housing, if we don't deal with this now, surely in 20, 30 years, the housing benefit that the government's going to have to pay, then anybody saying we should have built now. Does that not make sense?
Can I get the woman in the white top with the lovely turquoise scarf, please?
Thank you. I'm Sue McConnell from Gwent. I work as a probation officer in the tattered remains of what was left of the probation service. I'd like to say thank you to Greg for the work that Shelter does with my clients. Homelessness is probably the greatest burden and the greatest difficulty that men and women coming out of prison face, and the greatest threat to their ongoing safety. They're dangerous and vulnerable in equal measure, and homelessness is finding homes for them is absolutely key to that. My question, however, is not related to that. We've got a boom going on at the moment in building student accommodation. My observation is this is freeing up, it's private and it's freeing up houses for local authorities, but this student accommodation is fabulously expensive to rent for the students. So we have a generation of students already coming out of university burdened with the debt, part of which is their accommodation, also again unable to rent houses. So we are borrowing again from this generation, and I wonder if the panel has any comments about the whole student accommodation boom and presumably bust that is to follow.
Thank you. Can I get the gentleman just next to her there, please?
Thank you, Max Fischel. Is there any legislation requiring anybody to produce adequate, accessible and adapted accommodation for those people who actually need it?
Brilliant, thank you. Greg, I'll go to you first since I came to you last time.
Yeah, so, well, look, I mean, it's definitely the case that a feature of the way we're operating our housing market is a huge transfer of wealth from younger generations to older generations. And I think I think that is possibly going to be a feature of the way in which student accommodation's developing, but it's also a feature of everything from how the rental market works. Landlords are largely older cohorts. The renters are largely younger cohorts. And by younger, I mean really into families under 45. We're not talking any longer about a rental market that's just people in their early 20s. And when it comes to buying, most people, the average age of people are buying is now late into their 30s for those who are able to do so, and they tend to be buying from much older cohorts. So you've got a huge transfer of wealth happening from younger generations to older generations, and I think the thing we have to confront is that unless we are prepared to do something about high and rising prices of land and of property, we're not going to be able to. Sorry.
Sorry, can I ask you to stop interrupting and let the panellists speak, please?
I've nearly finished. So unless we're able to do something about to address high and rising prices of property, we're going to see that get worse and worse generation to generation. And so the lady was saying there's a sort of burning platform to do something now. There absolutely is something to do something now. We should have been doing it 30 years ago. If we go another 30 years, this is just going to become an even greater source of huge social injustice.
Brilliant, thank you. Andrew?
Can I take the student accommodation issue, because it links into one of my favourite subjects at the moment, which is the explosion of costs for students at the behest of vice-chancellors who are paying themselves salaries not quite as great as the chief executive Persimmon, who was a 100 million bonus, but nonetheless they are greatly overpaid. What ought to happen is that university managers should take real ownership over cost of living issues for students, whereas what they've essentially done is to privatise their housing. What they've done is to say that it's none of our responsibility, the conditions in which students live and all that. They do the deals with the private sector, who get massive returns, when what they should be doing, I think, is that just as local authorities should be building on behalf of their own communities, which will ensure that you get proper social rents, universities should be doing the same on behalf of their own students. Whereas, in fact, what they've actually done is to wash their hands of it, to get private companies in, which make very big and secure returns. And why they've been able to get away with it, it's very important to understand how all these policies are connected. They've been able to get away with it because of the huge increase in loans and loan entitlements, and bursaries which are paid to poorer students, which means that the whole cost of university education has been bid up over the last 10 years. Now, what is really needed is, just as we need a housing minister who gets a grip on housing costs and housing supply, we need a universities minister who, instead of unleashing a cultural war with Toby Young on the universities, actually gets to grips with real quality of life and cost of living issues for students, which is escalating student debts, substandard and very expensive student accommodation, and the overall cost of university education, which is now going through the roof. That's another reason why we need a Labour government.
Jordan?
Yeah, and I think that the crisis is now that you're talking about, and you know, the housing benefit bill was so big that the government decided to do the cap, which is the biggest cause of homelessness in our borough, and they've kind of arbitrarily cut the housing benefits people can get, but without properly investing in new housing, so people are caught in the middle of that. So I think that the extent of that homelessness, and I think everyone's been talking about that, and people's instability, it's all happening now, and the crisis is very much in our communities. I think the intergenerational point is really important and goes beyond, I think, just student accommodation. You know, in the 1980s, 3/4 of people who didn't own were in council housing, and now half are in the private rented sector, which is often unstable, moving around a lot. Families being brought up in accommodation that wasn't designed to be long term. We don't properly regulate our private rented sector in this country. And what you see from a borough like Camden is people are pushed well out of their communities in order young people to be able to afford housing, often outside of social networks, issues of isolation, and they've got no real viable future. So I think we need to think about these long-term issues, but we also need to start intervening in the private rented sector now, because people are living in it over the long term.
Brilliant.
Alison? Sharing the mic. Okay, to answer the gentleman here, there are other things that you can do around that what we call planning gain. North Norfolk District Council have done something quite interesting with a local housing association, which is to sell the land with planning permission at a pre-planning price, which means that the planning gain on that has been able to be used to leverage funding in order to build affordable housing in a rural setting. That's all that it means really good local relationships, but I think some of this requires, I think we still think that there are large systemic solutions to things, and I think sometimes that can stop us from doing lots of little things, and the lots of little things still matter as well as the big solution. So that's one thing. Student housing, let's be honest, venture capitalists really love student housing, and the reason they do it is because they can make a shed load of money on it. I'm really proud to be a trustee of Essex Student Union for a start. The university has, I think, one of the lowest levels of student accommodation in the country, but we run an ethical lettings agency that rents out high quality, low cost housing. But it's about money. Every time you follow the money, and that's where it is. Lifetime homes, what happened to that? There are fewer wheelchair accessible. I've just been looking up on the Having-Tech website, fewer wheelchair accessible homes now than there were in 2012, which seems ridiculous. We know that people are living longer. The child born today has got 50% chance of living to be 100. It's not like you don't get much notice of that. You know, you can't really be that surprised. But not only are we living longer, but we're living frailer. So we have this, we've got to change the way that we think. Lots of us, if we had a really good offer for older people downsizing, so for a lot of social landlords and within the owner-occupier sector, if there was somewhere that people felt confident to move to, people would move, but they need help doing that. They need to do that. You know, my mum's 86, she's rattling around in a 3-bed house, she's not been upstairs for 4 years, and she's quite adamant now she's leaving there in a box. So that you don't have that conversation with her when she's 86, but we have a genuine offer when she's 70. But it means talking about housing as places where people live, instead of talking about well, actually, if she stays there a bit longer, how much will she make, and what can we do, and what will that be worth, and it's this shifting away from homes as assets to homes as places where people live.
I think we could be a lot more creative in this country about how we do intergenerational housing and older people, and there's great examples across Europe.
Andrew likes trains so much he now has to catch one, so I'm going to ask him to give us his closing remark very quickly so that we don't miss out on it.
So can I just apologise, when I was Transport Secretary, I used to hold the trains for me. Now if Chris Graving discovers I'm on a train, he gets it cancelled. So, just one overarching comment. This is a very, very important session, but the single biggest issue facing us as a country in the next 15 months, by far, in a category of its own, is whether we leave the European Union or not. It's hugely important. It will affect the whole future of our international relations, our trade, everything. It goes to the heart of us as a country, whether we're going to be an inward-looking and slightly xenophobic country or an outward-looking internationalist society and so on. And these issues are connected, and we need to understand how they're connected. Part of the reason why we've got this massive backlash that we're having to deal with in politics at the moment, which led to Brexit 18 months ago, is because as a country we have not been paying nearly enough attention to the social crisis out there, and there is no more potent aspect of that social crisis than the housing crisis. And what I think we've got to do as a party is put a new offer to the British people together. At the moment, there are only 2 offers out there to the British people. One is from the Tories, which is Brexit and no social reform. And Brexit, of course, by scapegoating foreigners is supposedly somehow going to be an answer to the social crisis, but of course it's no answer at all. Unfortunately, at the moment, from the Labour Party, the offer is Brexit, because we're basically supporting Brexit, but with Jeremy some radical social reform. We need a new offer which is no Brexit and radical social reform. It's